The show takes place in a parallel universe in the year 1962. After winning World War II, the Nazi German and Imperial Japanese axis of power now rule the entire planet. In this alternate reality, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were never bombed and US President-elect Franklin D. was assassinated in the middle of the conflict. Instead, the Germans attacked Washington, D.C. with an atomic bomb, weakening the Allies. In the modern world, the Japanese Empire controls all of Asia, and the Germans rule over all of Europe and Africa. The center of power has been established in the former US, which has since been divided into two regions, Eastern and Midwestern North America, and these are under the control of the Greater Nazi Reich, also known as the GNR, while Western North America is ruled by the Japanese. Instead of stars, the American flag displayed a Hakenkreuz, signifying total submission to the Nazis. Even though the two empires cooperated to win the war, they have always had a Cold War-style relationship. After the passing of the current Führer, Hitler, it is said that his successor will seize control of the Japanese states and proclaim himself or herself to be the world's ruler. Americans were treated less favorably than Germans and Japanese in each empire, and they also had fewer rights within each state. Any American can be killed by the police if they suspect them of being suspicious, and they don't have to answer to anyone. The Rocky Mountains are between two former American states. It serves as a neutral area where neither empire's laws apply. The resistance group that is constantly protesting for their freedom and rights uses it as a haven. Then Joe Blake, a resident of Nazi-occupied New York, is introduced to us. He wants to join a resistance movement because he is sick of being a Nazi slave. He has finally located the address of the group's New York leader from a variety of sources. We see Times Square billboards with Nazi propaganda and advertisements as he travels to the specified location. The leader is a manager by the name of Don, and the headquarters turns out to be a shipping company. When Joe calls him a rebel, Don laughs in his face. Joe is already qualified to be their ally because he knows their addresses, but Don claims that if he gets caught, someone like him will reveal all of their secrets to the police. Joe claims to the manager that he has a strong will to fight, and Don ultimately gives him a chance. He is given the first task of transporting a truck full of coffee makers to Cannon City, Colorado, which is a neutral area. Joe asks what else is in the truck, but is told to follow instructions without asking many questions. The location is raided by the Nazis just before he departs. While Don is stopped and taken into custody, Joe drives away. It turns out that the raid was started by Obergruppenführer Smith, a third-rank Nazi officer. Obergruppenführer gave his men strict instructions to find and board the truck at all costs after being informed of Joe in it. An expert in Aikido, Juliana, is ecstatic to be free of Japanese rule. She is approached by her friend Doni, who has a crush on her, one day after practice. When he asks her out for coffee, Juliana responds by saying she already has a boyfriend named Frank. She meets her sister Trudy, who has been missing for a week, later that day. Trudy exudes joy and declares that things are about to get better in their lives. Then, we see Juliana meet her talented artist boyfriend Frank. He has, however, chosen to work as a mechanic in a factory because the Japanese are not big fans of modern art. We learn from their conversation that Frank is Jewish and has always lived in constant fear of the Nazis. Because his children would experience fear every day of their lives, Juliana does not want to have them. After the date, Juliana is on her way home when Trudy abruptly stops her. She hurriedly hands her a movie and declares that it is the only route to liberation. After that, she flees and is killed by the police a short while later. Before starting the movie, titled The Grasshopper Lies Heavy, Juliana dashes into her apartment. It depicts the world in which the Nazis were vanquished and the subsequent course of world politics. The video gives Juliana a taste of freedom and makes her want to fight, leaving her in shock. The film is a product distributed by a person by the name of the Man in the High Castle, we later learn. Even the senior officers are unaware of who he is and what he wants. He appears to be a resistance group ally, though, with access to resources that ordinary people do not. Despite being outlawed by the government, these movies are still being distributed covertly. When Frank gets home and learns that Juliana has a movie, he freaks out. So that they won't get into trouble, he wants it given to the police first thing in the morning. Juliana discovers a ticket to Cannon City with an address and time the following morning. It is obvious that her sister had to move the movie to that location, but now she is in charge. She flees with the movie to the bus station when Frank isn't around. The Japanese trade minister, Tagami, who is there to inform them of the arrival of a Japanese prince and princess, meets a high-ranking Nazi commander named Hugo at the German embassy in the Japan-ruled empire. Even the German embassy is required to be decorated following their preferences, which infuriates the Germans. Even so, they decide to do it to avoid unnecessary conflict. On the other hand, Don has been beaten and chained to a ceiling somewhere else. While traveling, Joe's truck stops due to a flat tire. Joe notices ashes in the air as a kind man assists him in replacing them. It turns out that the Germans are burning people who are physically and mentally disabled somewhere nearby because they don't want to use up their resources on them. Joe then keeps traveling until he arrives at a police checkpoint. In a fit of rage, he pulls a film out from under the truck and stashes it elsewhere. When the police fail to find it, they release him. Joe's task is to give the film to someone in Cannon City, just like Juliana's. In the meantime, Randall, who was meant to meet Juliana's sister, introduces himself to her. He believes Juliana is unqualified for the position and is also a member of the resistance. Because the person receiving the film assumes he is meeting a woman, the two of them argue over who gets to take it into Cannon City and decide Juliana should. A woman steals Juliana's bag as she is traveling to the city and takes off with both the fake movie and all of her money. Frank and a coworker named Ed are discussing politics at work. He and Randall, with whom Juliana had been speaking earlier, are soon detained for attempting to hide that film from the authorities. In Cannon City, Juliana arrives at the hotel and waits for the person she is to meet. Since her wallet was stolen, Joe, whom she meets while she is out and about, pays for her meal. They have a lengthy conversation and become friends. Then Joe calls the Obergruppenführer and it is revealed to us that he is a Nazi spy and that he is the one who arrested Don. Frank and Randall are detained and tortured in San Francisco. If Frank doesn't give Officer Kido Juliana's location by tomorrow, he risks killing his entire family, according to Officer Kido. Randall later asks Frank not to tell anyone about Juliana because what she is doing is more important than Frank's family. Finally, the police station is visited by Laura, Frank's sister, and her two kids, who are asked to wait in a room. To give Frank time to consider their plan before poisoning all three members of his family, Kido informs him that they will do so in 30 minutes. Juliana and Joe's friendship then deepens in canon, but Joe has begun to believe Juliana is a rebel. Then Juliana begins serving customers at the diner. Alan, a client whom she encounters, is seen reading a Bible. He gives Juliana the name of the store where she could purchase the book when she expresses interest in it. Joe is keeping an eye on her as she visits the store. A group of rebels attacks the Obergruppenführer and his assistant Eric in New York. They are all killed by Obergruppenführer, who captures a man called Doug and questions him. Juliana runs into Alan again somewhere else and says she needs to tell him something. They decide to meet at night on a bridge. Before heading to the meeting, Juliana hands Joe a letter and requests that if she doesn't return he mail it to her mother. Joe calls the Obergruppenführer and requests information about Alan, a man he believes to be a rebel. He reads the letter Juliana wrote to her mother after the call, in which she spoke of the wonderful world the movie had shown her. Joe, unable to restrain himself, also views the film he owns. His heart is filled with the desire to fight back after witnessing an alternative reality. He soon learns that Alan is a Nazi spy just like himself and not a rebel. Realizing Juliana's life is in danger, Joe gets his gun out and walks over to the bridge. Meanwhile, Randall is taken away to be put to death and returned to San Francisco. For the last time, Kido begs Frank to divulge Juliana's location, but he refuses. As a result, the room that Frank's sister Laura and her kids are in is filled with poisonous gas. Along with Randall, Frank is also taken to the execution chamber. Kido discovers about the burglar who robbed Juliana on the bus just before he is put to death. They believe Juliana and Frank are not guilty after learning about the fake movie. Then, on the bridge, Alan attempted to murder Juliana but was stopped by Joe's appearance. He is killed when Juliana pushes him off the bridge. She immediately starts crying as Joe cradles her in her arms. When they get back to the hotel, Joe helps Juliana unwind. She manages to maintain her composure despite the weight of the guilt she feels for killing someone. She asks if Joe has read the letter she wrote to her mother, to which he responds that he has. Juliana doesn't mind because she believes he did it out of concern for her and because she trusts him. Stay tuned to find out what happens next.